There are families that don't take from you with violence. They do it with reason. They sell what was left to one person, then call it sacrifice, call it family, and demand silence from the one who was robbed so everything still looks fine. And the cruelest part is when they hide behind a dying grandmother in hospice, turning the truth into a threat and the person who speaks up into the problem. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now I'd like you to hear what he's been carrying in his heart. There are families that don't take from you with violence. They do it with reason. They sell what was left to one person, then call it sacrifice, call it family, and demand silence from the one who was robbed so everything still looks fine. And the cruelest part is when they hide behind a dying grandmother in hospice, turning the truth into a threat and the person who speaks up into the problem. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now I'd like you to hear what he's been carrying in his heart. My name is Everett Whitaker. I'm 32 and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On paper, my life looks small and steady: music teacher, after-school programs, a schedule that's always full, but never the kind of full anyone in my family respected. I spend my days trying to convince 7-year-olds that rhythm is something you can feel in your bones, not just count with your fingers. I spend my afternoons helping shy kids find the courage to play a single note in front of their classmates without flinching. I spend my evenings writing lesson plans, answering parent emails, and pretending my rent doesn't make me sweat when the first of the month rolls around. I've always been the one in the background, the one who claps when everyone else gets a spotlight, the one who keeps the peace by making myself smaller, except with my grandmother. With Grandma Loretta Beaumont, I was never invisible. Growing up, her house on Lake Minnetonka smelled like lavender and old wood and sheet music that had lived 100 lives. Her living room wasn't decorated like a museum. It was lived in, warm, and anchored by the antique piano that sat in the corner like it belonged there the way a heartbeat belongs in a chest. When I was 7, she sat me on that bench and placed my fingers on ivory keys that had been played by her hands long before mine ever existed. The first time I made a clean sound, she didn't clap like it was cute. She nodded like it mattered. That piano was where I learned what it felt like to be taken seriously. 4 weeks ago, before everything shattered, my life still had that one solid thing: my grandmother was still here. Not healthy, not thriving, but here. And as long as she was here, there was still a kind of balance in our family. Not fairness, not love, but a balance. Then came the Tuesday call. It was late afternoon, right after my last lesson. I was erasing whiteboard staff lines when my phone buzzed with my dad's name, Calvin Whitaker, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. No hello. No how's your day. No warmth. Your grandmother had another episode, he said. They're moving her to hospice. My chalk froze in my hand. She's stable, he added, like that was supposed to make it better. Family meeting at the hospital in an hour. And then he hung up. I left the classroom without even turning the lights off. My after-school coordinator waved at me from the hallway, asking if I was okay, and I nodded like I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. I drove to the hospital with my hands tight on the steering wheel, watching the sky turn that flat winter gray Minneapolis does so well, and thinking about the word hospice like it was a door locking behind us. By the time I got there, my family was already assembled. They weren't standing with red eyes or trembling hands. They were huddled in a corner of the waiting room like a board meeting that had accidentally been scheduled in a hospital. My father stood with his arms crossed, jaw set in that familiar way that meant he was controlling the narrative. My mother, Gwen, clutched her designer purse against her chest like it could protect her from anything real. And my sister, Delaney, 28, glossy, always somehow perfectly put together, was scrolling through her phone, not even pretending to look worried. When I approached, my dad didn't ask how I was holding up. He didn't say, "This must be hard." He said, "Good, you're here." Like I'd arrived to help move a couch. We need to divide responsibilities. He continued, already looking past me like he could see the future and it was inconvenient. "Your mother and I have the business." "Delaney?" He nodded toward my sister, who didn't bother lifting her eyes, is in a critical phase with Ryder's family. Ryder Ashby, Delaney's boyfriend of 8 months. The son of Hugh Ashby. My dad's most important business partner, the man my father name-dropped like it was a prayer. My father finally looked directly at me. "So Everett," he said, and I swear, the way he said my name sounded like a chore. "You'll handle the hospice visits." "Daily." I blinked. "Daily. Your schedule is flexible," he said. "Teachers don't exactly work overtime. That hit in that quiet way insults do when they're wrapped in a smile. I taught 37 kids a week. I ran after-school programs. I spent Saturdays doing private lessons to cover expenses. My time wasn't flexible. My time just wasn't valued." I opened my mouth to say something, then closed it. Because that's what I always did. "Of course," I said softly. "I want to be with her anyway." "Perfect." My father's attention was already shifting away. "Just keep us updated if anything changes." As he turned, my mom leaned toward Delaney, her voice dropping low but not low enough. "At least he's useful for something," she said. My throat tightened, but I didn't turn around. Not because I didn't hear her. Because I'd heard versions of that line my whole life in different outfits. I'd learned the rules early: don't react, don't make a scene, don't give them the satisfaction of knowing they landed a hit. I walked down the hallway toward my grandmother's room with a calm face and a loud heartbeat. Grandma Loretta's hospice room was the only place in that hospital that didn't feel like a hospital. She had insisted on it. Lavender sachets sat in a little dish by the window. A stack of old books, actual paper books with worn spines, rested on the side table. She'd even made them move the harsh overhead light so she could keep the room softer. They try to make dying smell like antiseptic, she'd told me once, lips curling in disgust. If I'm going to go, I'm going to go surrounded by things I love. She was 76 and sharp as a blade. Congestive heart failure had hollowed out her body, but it hadn't touched her mind. When I walked in, her eyes tracked me immediately, bright and clear. "Everett," she said, like my name was still something good. "You look like you ran here." "I kinda did," I admitted, pulling a chair up close. Her hand, thin and cool, reached for mine. I held it the way I held the hands of kids who were nervous before recitals, steady, reassuring, like I could lend them my calm. "They didn't come in," she said, not as a question. "No," I said. "They're out there." She gave a small, knowing hum that said she wasn't surprised. We talked for a while about nothing and everything. I told her about my students, about the little girl who finally played through a full scale without stopping, about the boy who kept insisting that Beethoven was secretly a rapper because of how dramatic his music sounded. Grandma laughed soft and raspy, like laughter still belonged in the world. Then as the conversation slowed, she squeezed my fingers. "I need you to know something," she said. My stomach dipped. "Okay." "The piano," she said, and her eyes sharpened. "The antique one. The one in the living room." I swallowed. "Yeah, it's yours," she said firmly, like she was signing a paper in the air. "I told your parents. I told them last month in front of everyone. That piano belongs to you." I remembered that dinner. My father's jaw tightening. My mother exchanging a look with Delaney. My sister rolling her eyes and murmuring something about old junk. "Grandma," I started, because it felt like too much, like I didn't deserve something that important. "I want to," she cut in, voice steady. "You understand what it is, what it means. You're the only one who ever treated it like more than furniture." My eyes burned. "I learned my first scales on that piano," I said quietly. "And you'll play your last ones on it too," she said, not grim, just matter of fact. "Promise me you'll take care of it." "I promise," I said, and I meant it with a seriousness that scared me. Her expression softened into something almost tender, but there was a thread of steel underneath. "There are some things more valuable than money, sweetheart," she murmured. "And some people only learn that lesson the hard way." I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to demand reassurance that my father wouldn't do something reckless. But her eyelids fluttered with fatigue, and I could see the effort it took for her to stay present. So I just held her hand and listened to the hum of the machines and the muted hospital noises outside the door, and tried not to imagine what hard way looked like in my family. When I finally left that night, my father and mother were already gone. Delaney's car was gone. The waiting room was empty, and I walked out into the cold Minneapolis evening with my grandmother's words lodged in my chest like a warning I didn't yet understand. I visited every day after that. After school, I drove to Hospice, traded the classroom smell of dry erase markers for lavender and old paper, and sat with Grandma Loretta until the evening nurses came in to do their rounds. Sometimes she slept, sometimes she talked. Sometimes we listened to music quietly on my phone and she corrected the pianist's phrasing like she was still sitting in a concert hall. My parents didn't come. Delaney came once for 15 minutes in a coat that looked too expensive for a hospice room. She kissed Grandma's forehead with the kind of distance you use for acquaintances, took a selfie in the hallway, and left before Grandma even opened her eyes. I tried not to let it turn into anger because anger felt pointless, but it left a sour taste in my mouth I couldn't rinse out. One evening, Grandma asked me to bring something from her house. "I want my photos," she said, voice low but firm, "from when I played. The albums from the top shelf of the den closet. The ones your grandfather used to organize for me." "You want them here?" I asked. "I want to see my life," she said, "not just my ending." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "Okay, I'll go tomorrow after work." She nodded, satisfied, like she'd just assigned a mission she trusted me to complete. I still had a key. I'd always had a key. Grandma called it practical. My mother called it unnecessary. My father called it sentimental. The next day was a cold, rainy Thursday, one of those winter rains that feels like it can't decide if it wants to be snow. I drove out to Wayzata after school, the road curving toward Lake Minnetonka, the water a dark sheet under the gray sky. Grandma's neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet money buys. Big houses tucked behind bare trees, long driveways, no kids playing outside. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment listening to the rain ping against my windshield. Her house usually made me feel grounded. Like no matter what my family was, this place stayed the same. I didn't know yet that the same was already gone. The front door opened with the familiar click and the scent of lavender hit me immediately faint, but there, like Grandma's signature. I stepped inside and shook off my coat. The quiet was wrong. Not peaceful wrong, hollow wrong. It felt like walking into a room after an argument when everyone has left but the tension is still hanging in the air. The house wasn't just empty. It felt interrupted, like someone had come in and moved through it with purpose. I told myself it was my imagination. Then I looked into the living room. The corner where the antique piano had stood for 30 years was empty. No glossy wood, no curved legs, no familiar presence anchoring the room. Just open space and a rectangular indent in the carpet, flattened fibers lighter where the sunlight hadn't touched it. A ghost outline, proof that something heavy had been there for a long time and then abruptly had not. I stopped breathing. For a second, I honestly thought I'd walked into the wrong house. But the bookshelf was still crooked in the same way. The framed photo of Grandma at 32, hair-pinned up hands poised over keys, still sat on the mantel. The little chip in the baseboard from when I'd dropped a metronome at 10 years old was still there. This was her house. The piano was gone. My hand started shaking as I pulled my phone out. "Mom," I said the second she answered, not bothering with hello. "Where's Grandma's piano?" There was a pause long enough that I could hear muffled TV noise in the background. Then my mom's voice came through, casual and dismissive, like I'd asked about a grocery list. "Your father handled it," she said. "Adult matters, Everett. You don't need to worry about it. Handled it how?" My voice cracked. "Where is it?" I said. "Don't worry about it," she repeated, sharper now. "Stop stressing yourself out over things you don't understand." "Mom," I said, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Grandma told me." Click. She hung up on me. I stared at my screen like it might change its mind and ring back. It didn't. I stood in that empty living room for what felt like a long time, the rain tapping the windows, thunder rolling faintly in the distance. My eyes kept going back to the carpet indent, like if I stared hard enough the piano might reappear. It didn't. I forced myself to move because Grandma had asked for photos and she was waiting. I walked through the house, passing the dining room table where we used to do Christmas cookies, the hallway where Grandma kept old concert posters, the den where she'd made me practice until my fingers hurt, always pushing, always believing I could do more. Everything looked almost normal. Almost. But there were small things that didn't sit right. A vase on the sideboard angled slightly differently. A stack of mail shifted. The kind of tiny changes you only notice when you know a place so well you could walk it with your eyes closed. Someone had been here. In the kitchen, I tossed my wet gloves into the trash without thinking, and my eye caught something torn and wedged under a coffee filter paper with printed text ripped in half like someone didn't want it read. I pulled it out, fingers damp, heart hammering. It wasn't enough to make sense of. Just fragments, numbers, partial words, the edge of what looked like a company name. But it had the feel of a receipt, a pickup, a transaction. Something official, not proof, but a trail. I tucked it into my coat pocket like it might bite me. Then I heard something outside, a low engine sound, distant but present. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A small box truck was turning down the street, moving away from the neighborhood. It could have been anything: delivery, maintenance, somebody's renovation crew. But my stomach dropped anyway because it felt too close to the truth. I grabbed the photo albums Grandma wanted, shoved them carefully into a tote bag, and locked the door behind me with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. In my car, I called my dad. It went to voicemail. I called again. This time he answered, and his tone was impatient right from the start. "What, Dad?" I said, gripping the steering wheel. "The piano is gone. Where is it?" A beat of silence. Then, like it was an inconvenience to even say, "We'll talk tonight." "Talk tonight," I echoed. "Grandma Everett." He snapped the first hint of anger. "Not on the phone. Tonight." And he hung up. I sat there in the driveway, rain sliding down the windshield in uneven lines, my breath fogging the glass. I didn't call Grandma. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. Not yet. Because the fear my mother planted in me the night before, "if you tell her and something happens, it's on you," was still living in my chest like a parasite. But another thought was growing, too quieter but sharper. Silence wasn't keeping anyone safe. Silence was keeping them comfortable. I drove back toward Minneapolis with Grandma's albums beside me, the torn paper in my pocket, and one question pounding in my head like a drumbeat. What did they do with what she left only to me? And by the time I pulled up in front of my parents' house that night, I already knew I wasn't walking in to ask. I was walking in to face it. I didn't drive to my parents' house like I was going to dinner. I drove like I was going to an accident scene. Their place sat in a neat suburban pocket outside Minneapolis, trim lawns, even in winter porch lights that always felt a little too bright, a garage that swallowed everything messy so the outside could stay perfect. I parked at the curb instead of the driveway, partly out of habit, partly because I didn't want to feel like I was arriving as a son. I wanted to arrive as a witness. The moment I stepped onto the front walk, I could already hear voices inside, too lively for a house where a grandmother had just been admitted to hospice. That was my family's talent. They could keep talking about schedules and dinner plans while someone else was slowly disappearing in a hospital bed. I rang the bell once. I didn't bother with a second. My dad opened the door with a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted him mid-thought. "What is it, Everett?" he said, taking a slow sip. The smell of whiskey mixed with his cologne hit me sharp and familiar. The living room behind him was warm, lamplit, tidy. Everything in its place, everything controlled. The piano, I said, not even stepping inside yet. "Where is Grandma's piano?" He didn't blink, didn't hesitate, didn't even try to soften it. "Sold it," he said. "Got 95 grand for it. Good price." For a second, my brain refused to accept the words in the order he'd spoken them, like they couldn't possibly belong together. "You sold it," I repeated quieter than I meant to. "You sold it while she's in hospice." He shrugged with the bored confidence of someone used to being obeyed. She doesn't need a piano, Everett. That piano was left to me, I said, finally stepping inside. My voice sounded too steady for how hard my heart was hitting my ribs. She told you. She told all of us. My father's expression tightened, not with guilt, but with irritation, like I was being dramatic over something minor. Your grandmother is dying, he said. She's not thinking clearly. And you... He looked me up and down in a way that made me feel 12 years old again. You don't need it either. I set my keys on the entry table because my hands were shaking and I didn't want him to see. I do need it, I said. Not for the money. Not for I swallowed. It's hers. It's part of her life. It's part of mine. From the hallway, my mother's heels clicked sharp as punctuation. What's going on? Gwen asked, appearing in the doorway with her purse already on her shoulder like she might leave if the conversation got inconvenient. My father didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on me. He's upset about the piano, he said, like he was translating a child's tantrum into adult language. My mother's mouth pulled into a tight line. Everett, she said, as if my name itself was a warning. Please don't do this tonight. Do what I asked. Ask where my grandmother's property went. Ask why it's missing. Gwen waved a hand like she was brushing away smoke. Your father handled it. That's what you said on the phone, I shot back. And then you hung up. Her eyes flashed. Because you were getting worked up over something you don't understand. I understand plenty, I said. I understand that Grandma told me that piano was mine. I understand that it was in her living room 30 years and now it's gone. And I understand you both knew exactly what you were doing because you didn't tell her. My father's jaw flexed. Don't put words in our mouths. A light jingle came from the hallway behind him. Delaney. She appeared like she'd been waiting for her cue, holding a set of keys and swinging them lazily around her finger. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes, that polished, practiced smile she saved for moments when she knew she had an audience. Oh my God, she said, drawing out every syllable like I was exhausting. Are we doing this now? Where did the money go? I asked, because I already felt the answer coming. My father glanced at Delaney like he was proud. Mercedes, he said simply. Brand new. The room tilted. You bought her a car, I said, the words coming out flat, with Grandma's piano. Delaney's grin widened. She flicked the keys so they caught the light. Isn't it gorgeous? She said like she could see it in her mind already. I mean, it's not here yet, but it's basically mine. I stared at my father. Why, he exhaled like I was slow. Delaney needs to make the right impression. On who I asked, though I knew. The Ashbys, he said. Hugh's family has expectations. Ryder's mother is particular. This relationship matters. My mother stepped closer, her voice smooth now, the way it got when she wanted to sound reasonable in front of conflict. Delaney is building a future, she said. A real future, not what you're doing. I felt my cheeks burn. I'm a teacher. You teach children music classes, Gwen said, eyes sharp. You're not performing in concert halls. You don't have the space for an antique piano. You don't have the lifestyle. My father nodded like it was settled. Exactly. They weren't arguing about the piano. They were arguing about whether I deserved anything that wasn't scraps. And Grandma, I asked, voice low. What about what she wanted? She's on morphine half the time, my father said, dismissive. She won't even notice it's gone. My stomach turned. So you're counting on her being too sick to realize you stole from her? My mother's eyes narrowed. Don't use that word. What word? I said. Stole. Because that's what it is. Delaney gave a soft laugh and leaned against the wall like this was entertaining. Don't be jealous, Everett, she said, syrupy. It's not a good look. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I met her eyes, I might say something I couldn't take back. Instead, I looked at my father. Does Grandma know? I asked. The air changed. Silence isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's loud enough to ring. My father didn't answer. My mother didn't answer. Delaney's smile faltered just a fraction before she recovered. Why would we tell her? Gwen said finally, and the softness in her voice was gone now. She's dying. She doesn't need stress. You mean you don't want her to know, I said. My mother stepped closer until she was in my space, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she wore to business dinners and charity events. Everett, she said low and sharp, if you tell her, and it upsets her if her heart can't handle it, then whatever happens next will be on you. I stared at her, not sure I'd heard correctly. She kept going the way she always did when she sensed weakness. Do you want to be the reason your grandmother dies faster? Do you want that guilt? Because you won't put it on us? You'll carry it. My throat tightened, but it wasn't fear that rose in me first. It was fury. Not the loud kind. The kind that goes cold. You're really doing this, I said, voice steady. You're really trying to make me responsible for your choices. My father lifted his glass again like the conversation bored him. We did what was best. Best for Delaney. Best for appearances. Best for the Ashbys. Not best for Grandma. Not best for me. Not best for truth. I took a breath slow and controlled the way I taught my students to breathe before a recital so their hands wouldn't shake. Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property, I said. And I'm not going to lie to her. My mother's eyes widened, alarm flashing across her face. Everett. I'm not doing this with you, I said, stepping back toward the door. Not anymore. Delaney scoffed behind me. So dramatic. I didn't turn around. I walked out into the cold night air, my lungs burning like I'd been holding my breath for years. I drove back to my apartment with my jaw clenched so tight it ached. My place wasn't much one-bedroom, second-hand furniture, a small keyboard tucked against the wall, because a real piano didn't fit, and I couldn't afford one anyway. My parents loved to point that out like my living space was a moral failure. I didn't even take my coat off. I sat down on my couch and stared at the framed photo on my bookshelf. Grandma Loretta at a younger age, hands poised over the antique piano, her face lit from within like she was exactly where she belonged. Gwen's words circled my head like poison. If you tell her and something happens, it's on you. I tried to imagine walking into hospice and saying, they sold your piano. They used the money to buy Delaney a car. I tried to picture Grandma's face, changing her breathing, hitching her heart, struggling. My chest tightened. And then I heard Grandma's voice from years ago when I was 12 and terrified to admit I'd failed a math test. Truth can hurt, sweetheart, she'd said, but lies rot you from the inside. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my own feelings to keep peace. All the times I'd let my father's dismissive tone and my mother's sharp little comments slide because pushing back felt pointless. All the times I'd let Delaney take the bigger slice, the better seat, the louder praise. I'd been training myself to disappear, and where had it gotten me? Alone on a couch staring at a photograph while my grandmother was being erased in real time. By 3 a.m, I wasn't asleep. I was sitting upright, hands clasped, decision forming like something solid. Grandma deserved the truth. Not because it would fix anything. Not because it would get the piano back. Because she deserved to know who she'd trusted. I set my alarm for early morning, before school, before anyone could call me, guilt me, corner me, rewrite what happened. I was going to hospice. I was going to tell her everything. The roads were almost empty at 6:30. Minneapolis in the early morning has a stillness that feels sacred when you're not the one carrying something heavy. The sky was a washed-out gray-blue, the kind that promised more snow, even if it didn't deliver. My hands gripped the steering wheel and I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I hadn't slept. My eyes stung every time I blinked. My head throbbed behind my temples. But my resolve was clean. I parked, walked in, and nodded at the front desk like I belonged there, which, in a way, I did. I'd been there every day. I knew the routine. I knew the smell of disinfectant that tried and failed to overpower lavender. I knew the soft squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. I reached Grandma Loretta's room and paused outside the door for a second, hand hovering over the handle. This was the moment. The point of no return. When I stepped inside, she was awake, propped up against her pillows, looking toward the window as if she could see all the way to the lake from here. The morning light made her skin look almost translucent, but her eyes were clear, focused, alive. She turned her head when she heard me. "Everett," she said softly. "You're early." I know I said, pulling the chair close. My voice cracked on the last word. I cleared my throat. "I needed to come before school." Her gaze sharpened. Something happened. I didn't deny it. There was no point. I sat down, took her hand, and felt how fragile it was in mine. That alone almost broke me. My throat tightened and my vision blurred, but I forced myself to breathe. "Grandma," I said, "I have to tell you something. It's going to hurt, but I can't let you be lied to." She didn't flinch. She didn't tell me to stop. She just studied my face and then nodded once. "Then tell me," she said. So I did. I started where it began because I needed it to be clear. "You asked me to go to the lake house for your photo albums," I said. "So I went after school." Her fingers curled faintly around mine. And the piano was gone. I said the words, feeling surreal even now. The corner was empty. There was an indent in the carpet where it's been sitting for years, like it was ripped out. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes tightened like a muscle bracing. "I called Mom," I continued. "She said Dad handled it. She told me not to worry." Then she hung up. Grandma's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Of course." "I went to their house," I said. My voice steadied as the truth rolled out. "Dad told me he sold it. He said he got $95,000. I watched her face closely, waiting for the shock to land. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for a long time. "They used the money to buy Delaney a car," I said, forcing myself not to soften it. "A Mercedes. They said it so she can make the right impression with the Ashbys." Grandma's eyes flickered anger maybe, or disappointment, but contained controlled. I kept going because I had to. "They said you don't need a piano anymore," I said. "They said I don't either. Mom said I teach children, so it's not like I'm a real performer." Grandma's fingers tightened around mine just slightly, and when I asked if you knew, I said, my voice dropping, they went silent. "They're keeping it from you." Her gaze stayed on me, unwavering. "I told them you had a right to know," I said. "And then Mom..." I swallowed hard. "Mom told me that if I told you and it upset you if something happened, then it would be my fault. She said I'd be responsible." For the first time, Grandma's expression shifted. Not into sadness, into something cold, not cruel, just clear. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and her voice was so calm it made my skin prickle. You're not..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "You're not shocked, you're not broken, you're not falling apart." Grandma Loretta looked out the window again, then back at me. "I know my son," she said quietly. "I've known him for a long time." A beat passed. My chest felt tight, like the room had gotten smaller. "I kept hoping he'd become someone better," she continued. "But hope doesn't replace preparation." I blinked. "Preparation?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, wincing at the effort, and nodded toward the bedside table. "Hand me my phone," she said. I hesitated. "Grandma, please," she said, still calm, but there was steel in it. I picked up her phone and placed it in her hand. Her fingers moved with surprising certainty as she unlocked it and scrolled through her contacts. She stopped on a name and pressed call. She tapped the speaker icon, then held the phone between us. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A man's voice came through, low, professional, familiar, in the way older attorneys sound when they've spent decades speaking in rooms where words matter. "Loretta," he said. "How are you feeling?" "I'm dying," Miles' grandma replied, blunt as ever. "But I'm clear-headed, and it's time." A pause. I could hear paper shifting on the other end, like he'd sat up straighter. "I understand," Miles said. "Tell me when." "Sunday," Grandma said. "Gwen's birthday party. At my house in Wayzata." Another beat. "I'll be there," Miles said. "I'll prepare everything." "Good," Grandma said, and then her voice sharpened just slightly. Not with anger. With certainty. It's time for them to meet my attorney. The words hung in the air. My stomach dropped not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that something much bigger than the piano had been moving beneath the surface for a long time. Yes, Miles said. It's time. Grandma ended the call and set the phone down carefully like it was a chess piece placed exactly where it needed to be. I stared at her, my mouth slightly open. Grandma. Who is that Miles Wexler, she said. He's been my attorney for a long time. You have your own attorney, I said, still trying to catch up, and Dad doesn't. He assumes he knows everything about me. She said, a faint, tired smile tugging at her mouth. That's always been his weakness. My pulse hammered. What's going to happen on Sunday? Grandma looked at me, and for a moment I saw the full force of who she'd been before illness, the woman who had walked onto stages and owned them. On Sunday, she said softly, we're going to put truth back where it belongs. I swallowed. What do you need me to do? She reached for my hand again, and her grip, though weak, was certain. Come to the party, she said. Dress nicely. Not to impress anyone, just to remind yourself you don't have to shrink. I nodded, throat tight. And bring your patience, she added. There will be a lot of noise. Let it happen. Let people show who they are. Don't rush to rescue anyone from consequences. I barely breathed. You've been planning this. Her eyes flickered with something that looked like regret. I've been watching, she said, for years. She leaned back against the pillows, suddenly more tired, but her voice stayed steady. Your parents thought I was too sick to find out, she murmured. They thought you were too quiet to tell me. She looked at me the way she used to when I got through a difficult piece for the first time. They were wrong, she said. I sat with her until the nurse came in and adjusted her IV. I kissed her forehead before I left, my heart a storm I couldn't calm. As I stepped into the hallway, Trish, the nurse on duty, caught my eye. She didn't smile the way nurses do when they're trying to be comforting. She looked serious. Everett, she said quietly, glancing down the hall as if making sure we weren't being overheard. Can I tell you something? Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse. She lowered her voice even more. Your parents have been asking a lot of questions lately. About paperwork. About who can sign what. About whether your grandmother is fully aware. My stomach clenched. Why would they? Trish's expression said she'd seen this story before. People get nervous when there's money involved, she said gently. I just thought you should know. I nodded, my chest tightening with a new kind of fear. The piano wasn't the end. It was just the first thing they did out loud. I walked out into the morning cold and sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Sunday was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself to be hurt. I was bracing myself to watch the truth finally take up space. Miles Wexler texted me the address before I even made it to my car that morning. No long explanation, no comforting language. Just a pin on a map and a time. St. Paul, 1:30 p.m. Bring any documents you have. I stared at the message while the school parking lot filled with the usual chaos, parents idling in SUVs, kids dragging backpacks too big for their bodies, the faint sound of a trumpet warming up somewhere in the building. Everything around me looked normal, and I felt like I was standing on a fault line. I went inside, found my principal between a budget meeting and a hallway duty rotation, and told her I needed to take the afternoon off for a family matter. I didn't offer details, I couldn't. Some things sounded unbelievable the moment you said them out loud. She looked at my face, saw whatever was there, and didn't press. Go, she said. We'll cover you. By noon I was driving east across the river, the sky the same dull gray it had been all week. St. Paul always felt older than Minneapolis, more brick, more history, more corners where things had happened long before you arrived. The streets were wet from leftover slush. I followed the GPS through a small business district and parked in front of a low building with a simple sign that read Wexler and Associates in plain lettering. No flashy law firm branding, no marble lobby, just a quiet door, like the truth didn't need to advertise. Inside, the air smelled like paper and old leather. A receptionist looked up, asked my name, and pointed me down a short hallway. My shoes sounded too loud on the tile. Miles Wexler stood when I walked in. He was older than I'd pictured from his voice, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with silver hair cut neatly and glasses that made his eyes look sharper than they probably already were. He wore a suit that looked like it had been tailored once and cared for forever. No extra gestures, no wasted movement. "Everett Whitaker," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, steady. The kind of handshake that didn't try to dominate but didn't yield an inch. "Mr. Wexler," I started. "Miles," he corrected, already motioning me to sit. "Your grandmother calls you her brave boy." That landed in my chest like a weight. I cleared my throat and sat in the chair across from his desk. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He opened a folder and slid a single sheet across the desk. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to understand something clearly. Your grandmother is competent. She is lucid. She has been consistent. Everything we discuss today is based on her instructions, and they are legally sound." I nodded, swallowing. "My parents keep saying morphine. They keep saying they say that because it serves them." Miles cut in, calm as stone. "Not because it's true." He watched me for a moment, as if measuring whether I could handle what came next. "Tell me," he said, "what do you believe is true about the house in Wayzata?" I blinked. Of all the questions, I didn't expect that one. "The lake house," I said. "It's my parents' house. Grandma let them have it after Grandpa died. That's what everyone's always said." Miles didn't react. He simply reached into his desk drawer, pulled out another folder, and placed it on the desk like he was setting down something heavy. "Is that what they told you?" he said, "or is that what you've assumed because they've lived there as if it were true?" My throat tightened. "What are you saying?" Miles opened the folder and slid out a document protected in a clear sleeve. He didn't hand it to me right away. He turned it so I could read it from where I sat. The top of the page was official, stamped clean. The kind of paper that doesn't care about family dynamics. Owner Loretta Beaumont. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. "No," I whispered, because it didn't fit inside my head. "That can't be." "It can," Miles said evenly. "And it is." He tapped the document with one finger. "There is no deed transfer, no recorded gift, no amendment. Your grandmother allowed your parents to reside there. That is not the same thing as ownership." My mouth went dry. "They've been hosting parties there for years," I said, barely hearing myself. "They've renovated the kitchen. They've behaved like owners," Miles said. "They have not been owners." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not just anger, but the sick feeling of realizing my father's confidence had always been borrowed. "Why would Grandma let them believe it was theirs?" I asked. Miles leaned back slightly, hands folded. "Because she wanted to see who they would become when they thought there were no consequences. She hoped your father would choose decency. She prepared for the possibility that he would not." I stared at the deed again. My father standing in that living room holding court. My mother treating every room like a showroom. Delaney posing in front of the lake like she'd been born entitled to it. All of it built on something that wasn't legally theirs. Miles watched my face carefully. "Do you understand why your grandmother chose Sunday?" "The birthday party," I said, voice hoarse. "Among other things," Miles replied. "Your father has leveraged that address socially. He has used it as proof of stability and success. If he has referenced it in business contexts, informally or otherwise, that can create risk for him. Real risk." The word risk sounded too mild for what I was feeling. "You mean, if he used it to impress partners?" I started. "If he represented it as an asset he controlled." Miles said, "That matters. It changes how people view him. It changes how they trust him. And once those people learn he has been living in someone else's house while implying otherwise." Miles let the sentence end on its own. I swallowed hard, imagining Hugh Ashby's face if he ever learned the truth. The man my father treated like a kingmaker. The man Delaney was trying to charm her way into. Miles turned a page in the folder. "Now," he said, "the house is only one portion of this." He slid a thick set of papers toward me. 5 years ago, your grandmother established a trust independent of any will your family has discussed. The word trust hit me like a second door opening. She did what I asked. She created a legal structure that removed her most significant assets from casual interference, Miles said. Property, accounts, items of sentimental value, the piano included. I stared at him. So the piano wasn't just something she wanted me to have. It was protected. It was meant to be protected, Miles said, which is why your parents selling it is not simply morally wrong. It is legally problematic. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. Miles's voice remained level, but there was a sharpness underneath it now, like a blade kept in a sheath. When families attempt to take control of an estate unlawfully, they often follow a familiar playbook. They create a story that the elder is confused. They push for signatures. They look for power of attorney changes. They position themselves as helpers while quietly taking over. My spine went cold. Trish's warning echoed in my head. Paperwork. Signing. Competence. Miles leaned forward. Has your family referenced morphine confusion forgetfulness in a way that felt rehearsed? I didn't even need to think. Yes, I said. My dad said she isn't thinking clearly. My mom said she doesn't need to know stressful things. They keep saying she's not in a condition to make decisions. Miles nodded once as if checking a box. Then we proceed carefully, he said. Your grandmother understands this. She asked me to meet you for a reason. He slid a smaller envelope across the desk. This is not the only copy, but I want you to have it. If anyone attempts to corner you, intimidate you, or manipulate you into signing something, you will call me first. Do you understand? I stared at the envelope like it was a lifeline. Yes. Miles's gaze softened just slightly. You are not responsible for your parents' behavior, he said. Your mother's attempt to put your grandmother's health on your conscience is emotional coercion. It is common. It is effective. It is also wrong. My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Miles stood signaling the meeting was over in the same way he'd begun it, cleanly, decisively. One more thing, he said. Sunday will be unpleasant. But unpleasant is not the same as unsafe. Your job is not to argue. Your job is to be present. Your grandmother wants witnesses. I drove back to Minneapolis feeling like I'd been walking around my whole life with a blindfold I didn't know was there. When I got home, my apartment felt even smaller. I tossed my keys onto the counter, dropped my coat over a chair, and stared at the corner where my keyboard sat like a substitute for something real. I thought about the box Grandma had given me years ago, old programs, photos, little keepsakes she'd saved, like she was making sure I'd have pieces of her even if I lost the rest of the family. I'd never gone through it carefully. It felt too intimate, like reading her diary. But Miles's words pushed me toward it. Competence, signatures, control. I pulled the box out from the top shelf of my closet and set it on the floor. Dust puffed up when I opened it. Inside were faded concert programs, pressed flowers, handwritten notes from friends, and photographs of Grandma in gowns under stage lights, her hands poised over that piano like she owned the world. Near the bottom, beneath a stack of sheet music, I found an envelope I had never noticed. It was sealed. My name was written across the front in Grandma Loretta's elegant hand. And beneath my name in smaller letters were 4 words that made my stomach flip: when you need to understand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, partial but enough to recognize the shape of them, and a single handwritten note clipped to the top, ink slightly faded. The house never left my hands, sweetheart. It was only borrowed. I stared at that line until my eyes burned. Borrowed. My father had built a whole identity on borrowed things. I folded the note carefully and put it back in the envelope like it was something fragile and holy. Sunday wasn't just a birthday party. It was a controlled collision between the story my parents told and the truth Grandma had been protecting for years. And I was finally seeing the outline of what she'd been doing all along, not fighting loudly, not begging anyone to be decent, just making sure decency would have teeth when it mattered. Saturday night felt like the air before a storm. Not because anything dramatic was happening in my apartment, no music, no guests, no chaos, but because every notification on my phone felt like a hand reaching for my throat. I had the envelope on my kitchen table. I had Miles's card beside it. I had Grandma's words in my head looping in a calm, steady voice. Be patient. Let them show themselves. At 7:30, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at her name until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again. Then a third time. I finally answered, mostly because I wanted to hear what she thought she could still control. Everett, Gwen said, and her voice was sweet, so sweet it sounded fake. Hi, honey. I just wanted to make sure you're coming tomorrow. I'm coming, I said. Oh, good, she replied quickly. Good. Because it would mean a lot to your father if you were there. We're having important guests. This isn't the time for misunderstandings. There it was. The real message. Don't embarrass us. I'm not interested in misunderstandings, I said. She laughed softly, a sound that always made my skin crawl because it was her favorite way to pretend things weren't serious. Exactly. So just let's have a nice day. Your father has worked very hard to put this together for me, and we don't need anyone making things awkward. I took a slow breath. What exactly do you mean by awkward? A pause. Then she slipped just a little. If anyone asks about the piano, she said too quickly, we're just going to say your grandmother wanted to sell it. To invest in Delaney's future. It's a sweet story, actually. My stomach turned, not because I hadn't expected it, but because hearing it out loud made it undeniable. So you already have the lie lined up, I said. Her sweetness hardened. Everett, don't call it that. It's not lying. It's simplifying. People don't need every detail. Grandma needed the detail, I said quietly. It was hers. Gwen's voice dropped a notch. Tomorrow is my birthday. Please don't punish me on my birthday. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm showing up. That's all I'm asking, she said. And then she tried to put the sugar back on her tone. Wear something nice. Don't look, don't look like you're coming to start something. I ended the call before she could say anything else because I could feel the old reflex rising, the reflex to explain, to soothe, to make her comfortable. I refused. A minute later, a text came through from my dad. Tomorrow. Behave. Important guests. No greeting. No question about Grandma. Just a directive. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The message wasn't really for me. It was for the version of me they thought still existed, the one who flinched at disapproval, the one who would swallow truth to keep their image intact. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Miles. He answered on the second ring. Everett. They've coordinated a story, I said. My mom just told me what to say if anyone asks about the piano. She said Grandma wanted to sell it to invest in Delaney's future. There was a pause, not surprised, just measured. Good, Miles said. Good, I repeated, confused. Yes, he replied. Let them say it. Let them say it loudly. Let them say it in front of the people whose opinions they care about. The more public they make it, the less they can rewrite later. My pulse steadied a fraction. So I shouldn't. You should not argue tomorrow before I speak, Miles said, voice firm. Your parents will want to bait you into an emotional exchange. They will want you to look unstable, bitter, jealous. Do you understand? I swallowed. Yes. Let them build their story, he continued. Then let the documents do what documents do. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened Grandma's envelope again. This time I read every line like my life depended on it. There were notes in the margins, dates, amounts, small references that felt like a ledger. One line in Grandma's handwriting stood out: property taxes paid from my account. Utilities paid from my account. I stared at it, heat rising in my chest. They hadn't just lived in her house. They'd lived on her money, and all the while they spoke about her like she was inconvenient, confused in the way. Trish's warning sharpened in my mind. paperwork, competence, signing. I imagined my father leaning over Grandma's bed with that calm, controlling voice trying to get her to authorize something for her own good. I pushed the thought away only because it made my hands shake. At 9:30, my phone rang again. This time it was Grandma. The hospice number. I answered instantly. Grandma. Her voice was weaker than it had been the morning before, but her mind sounded steady. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I'm tired," she admitted. "But I'm here. Are you ready for tomorrow?" I swallowed. "I'm trying to be." She breathed in slowly, then out. "Your father sold that piano once already in his head," she said, "long before he moved it. At that dinner last month, he talked about it like it was his decision. He told people he would take care of it." I clenched my jaw. I remember. "He announced it like he owned it," she continued, and her voice held a quiet anger now. "And he assumed I was too weak to stop him. He assumed you were too quiet to matter." My chest tightened. "I should have." "No," she cut in gently. "You did exactly what you needed to do. You told me the truth. That's the only thing you control." I stared at the dark window in my kitchen, my reflection faint in the glass. "Why tomorrow?" I asked, though I already knew part of it. "Why your house? Why my mom's birthday?" "Because your mother loves an audience," Grandma said simply. "And your father loves witnesses when he thinks they're on his side. Tomorrow there will be people who matter to them. People they can't easily dismiss afterward. People who will remember." Her voice softened. "This isn't about humiliation. It's about protection. After I'm gone, I need you protected. I need the truth anchored somewhere outside their mouths." I blinked hard, fighting the burn behind my eyes. "I don't want to hurt you," I whispered. "I don't want this to make you." "It won't," she said, steady again. "The hurt already happened. We're just naming it." A beat of silence passed between us, filled with the quiet hum of hospital equipment on her end. "Wear something that makes you stand up straight," she said. "Not for them. For you." "I will," I promised. "And remember," she added, voice low and firm, "you are not the problem for telling the truth. They are the problem for needing lies." When we hung up, I sat there with the phone against my chest for a long time. Then I went to my closet. I didn't have anything expensive, no designer suit, no flashy watch. But I picked the cleanest, sharpest version of myself, dark slacks, a crisp button-down, a simple coat. The kind of outfit that said I was an adult who belonged in the room, not a child to be dismissed. I laid it out carefully on the chair like I was preparing for a recital where the stakes weren't notes and applause but my entire identity. Before bed, I stared at my dad's text again. Behave. Important guests. For years, behave had meant stay quiet. Don't contradict. Don't embarrass us. Now it meant something else. It meant don't let them drag you back into the role you've outgrown. I turned my phone face down, switched off the lamp, and lay in the dark, listening to the building's pipes creak. I didn't sleep much. But I didn't waver either, because I finally understood what my mother's message really was when she said, "Don't make the family look bad." She wasn't asking for peace. She was asking for permission to keep lying. And tomorrow, in Grandma's house by the lake, with their guests watching and their stories ready, they were going to find out what happens when a lie meets paper and ink and a woman who planned ahead. I closed my eyes and made myself one final promise: I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. I would simply stand there and let the truth speak in the room they believed they owned. I parked 2 streets away from the house and sat there longer than I needed to. The sun was out, but it was weak, the kind of winter light that doesn't warm anything, just makes the cold more visible. Bare branches rattled in the wind coming off Lake Minnetonka, and for a moment I watched them sway, counting my breaths like I was about to walk onto a stage. When I finally stepped out of the car, I didn't feel like I was arriving at my parents' home. I felt like I was entering someone else's set. The house in Wayzata looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate siding wide windows facing the lake, the front door polished like it expected admiration. For years, I'd walked up those steps thinking this place belonged to my parents. Now, every step felt different. Heavier. Sharper. This was Grandma Loretta's house. Everything happening here today was happening on borrowed ground. Inside the party was already forming its rhythm. Laughter bounced off the walls. Glasses clinked. Someone had put on soft background music, the kind meant to sound tasteful without asking for attention. A banner reading Happy 60th. Gwen hung across the back wall, slightly crooked. There were more people than I expected. At least 30, maybe 35. I recognized relatives I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors from around the lake, people who'd known Grandma back when she hosted dinners herself before my parents took over, as if by default. A few men in sport coats I knew by reputation alone, small business types who spoke in careful sentences and watched everything with quiet calculation. And then there were the Ashbys. Hugh Ashby stood near the windows, posture, straight expression, neutral in the way men get when they're evaluating risk. His son Ryder hovered close to Delaney, his hand resting lightly on her back, not protective so much as performative. I noticed the space where the piano used to be before I noticed anyone's face. They'd moved a tall potted plant there, its broad leaves spreading outward like an attempt to cover a wound. But I saw the absence immediately. I always would have. I took a slow breath and stepped fully into the room. Miles Wexler was already there. He sat near the edge of the living room, legs crossed, a slim leather briefcase resting against his chair. He didn't mingle. He didn't scan the room. He looked like a man waiting for a train, not a party. When his eyes met mine, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Everything was on track. My father didn't notice me right away. He was too busy working the room, shaking hands, laughing louder than necessary, positioning himself at the center of every cluster. He looked energized, buoyed by attention, by the illusion that everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Eventually, he clinked his glass and raised his voice. "Everyone," Calvin said, smiling broadly, "if I could steal your attention for a moment." The room quieted. People turned toward him. Phones slipped into hands, cameras ready. He put an arm around my mother, Gwen, who smiled in practiced gratitude. "Today we celebrate this incredible woman," he said, "the heart of our family." Applause followed. My mother dipped her head modestly, soaking it in. And my father continued, "We also celebrate new beginnings." He gestured toward Delaney and Ryder. "Our daughter has an exciting future ahead of her, and we're proud to support her every step of the way." Delaney beamed. Ryder nodded politely. My father's eyes swept the room, locking in his audience. "Some of you may have heard we made a big decision recently, one that reflects our family's values, investing in the future, taking care of our own." My chest tightened. "We'll explain outside," he said, already moving toward the door. "Come on." People followed, curious, smiling, glasses in hand. The driveway was bright with reflected light off a car so new it looked unreal. A luxury sedan sat parked front and center, its paint flawless, a massive red bow tied across the hood like something out of a commercial. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Delaney clapped a hand to her mouth, pretending to be surprised. My father stepped forward, basking in the moment. "This," he announced, "is what happens when family comes together." He turned, slightly positioning himself so everyone could hear. "Loretta made a generous choice," he said smoothly. "She decided to sell her antique piano to help invest in Delaney's future. It was what she wanted." The words landed like a punch. Applause broke out. Phones rose higher. Delaney hugged my father, dramatically laughing as if this were the happiest day of her life. I stood still, my hands cold at my sides. The lie had been spoken clearly, loudly, publicly. A few murmurs threaded through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. "I thought that piano was supposed to go to Everett," someone whispered. "I heard that too," another replied. Aunt Joan stepped forward before my father could move on. She stood squarely in front of him, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Did you ask Loretta before you sold it?" she asked. My father didn't miss a beat. "She's in hospice, Joan. She's not in a position to make decisions like that." Joan's jaw tightened. "She's been perfectly clear with me every time I visited." "She's confused," my father said quickly. The medication. She's not confused, Joan said flatly. You didn't ask her. The air shifted. Hugh Ashby straightened slightly, his gaze sharpening. Before my father could respond, Miles stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and spoke with the authority of someone who knew exactly why he was there. My name is Miles Wexler, he said. I've been Loretta Beaumont's attorney for over 30 years. Every conversation around us stilled. I met with her this morning, he continued, in the presence of her nurse. She is mentally competent, fully aware, and she asked me to address a matter of urgency. My father's smile faltered. I apologize for interrupting a celebration, Miles said, his tone polite but firm. But misinformation has just been presented as fact, and it requires correction. He placed a document on the outdoor table where everyone could see it. This property, Miles said, tapping the paper, has never been transferred out of Loretta Beaumont's ownership. A murmur swept through the crowd. For clarity, he added, this house does not belong to Calvin or Gwen Whitaker. It belongs to Loretta Beaumont. Always has. My mother's face drained of color. My father opened his mouth. That's not you have resided here with permission, Miles said calmly. That is not the same as ownership. Hugh Ashby took a small step back. Miles continued unfazed. Furthermore, expenses associated with this property, including taxes and utilities, have been paid from Loretta Beaumont's accounts. Not yours. People exchanged looks now. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was structure collapsing. And Miles said, lifting a second set of papers, 5 years ago, Loretta Beaumont established a trust. The word fell like a dropped glass. This trust includes this property, multiple financial accounts, and personal items of significance, Miles said, including the antique piano that was recently sold. He paused, letting that sink in. The sole beneficiary of this trust, he said, turning slightly, is Everett Whitaker. Silence. Complete heavy silence. Delaney's breath hitched. That's not true, she said too loudly. She's not in her right mind. My nurse can attest otherwise, Miles replied, nodding toward Trish, who stood near the doorway, her expression steady. As can I. And because the piano belonged to the trust, Miles continued, its sale was unauthorized. The proceeds, $95,000, must be returned to the trust. My father's voice cracked. We don't have that money. Miles glanced toward the car, still gleaming behind the bow. Then the asset purchased with those funds must be addressed. Delaney let out a sharp sob. The bow suddenly looked ridiculous, obscene. My father turned on me. You did this, he said, pointing. You manipulated her. My mother joined in, mascara streaking. You're jealous. You couldn't stand seeing your sister happy. I stepped forward. My voice didn't shake. I told Grandma the truth, I said, because it was hers to know. I looked around the circle of faces. The trust was created 5 years ago, long before this. None of this started with me. Then I said what I'd never said out loud before. I heard my mother say, "At least he's useful," when she sent me to hospice. She hung up on me when I asked about the piano, and she told me if Grandma got upset, her death would be my fault. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the group. No one clapped now. No one filmed. Guests began to drift away, quietly, awkwardly. Hugh Ashby leaned toward my father and spoke in a low voice I couldn't hear. Whatever he said made my father's shoulders slump. Ryder stepped away from Delaney without touching her. The party collapsed in on itself. The banner sagged. The cake sat untouched. Miles came to stand beside me. We can formalize everything now, he said quietly. You have the right. I looked at my parents, my father hollow-eyed, my mother shaking, my sister nowhere to be seen. Not yet, I said. But we will. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I was choosing. We formalized everything before the sun set. Miles stayed drafting documents at the dining table where my parents had hosted countless dinners, pretending this house was theirs. Aunt Joan remained as a witness along with two neighbors who had seen enough to understand the weight of what they were signing. The agreement was clear. The $95,000 would be returned to the trust on a structured schedule. I allowed more time than the law required, not out of mercy but out of control. The house would remain occupied temporarily under a written lease. No ownership claims. A defined end date. No more ambiguity. My parents signed without looking at me. The following weeks were quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. Calls stopped coming in for my father. Meetings were canceled. Conversations grew shorter. I heard through the grapevine that Hugh Ashby had withdrawn from a joint project. Someone had said, if he'd misrepresented something that basic, what else isn't true? Delaney sold the car at a loss. Ryder ended things quickly, cleanly, the way people do when they're protecting their own. I didn't celebrate. I went to hospice every day. I sat with Grandma, read to her, talked about small things. I told her the paperwork was in motion. She nodded, satisfied. One morning, a few weeks later, the call came early. When I arrived, her breathing was thin, her eyes tired but still clear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I waited too long." I shook my head. "You gave me what I needed." She smiled faintly. "You learned to stand." She passed with my hand in hers. The funeral was small, simple, just as she'd wanted. I played a Chopin nocturne on the church piano. It wasn't her antique, but the music held her just the same. Months later, I moved into the house by the lake. I cleared the corner where the piano had once stood. I placed a new instrument there, not a replica, not a replacement, just a beginning. The house breathed differently without lies inside it. My parents moved out early. They couldn't stay where truth echoed off every wall. One evening much later, Delaney called. She told me she was working an entry-level job, taking the bus, seeing a therapist. "I'm trying," she said. "I can listen," I replied. "But trust takes time." When I hang up now, I sit at the piano and look out over the water. The antique is gone. But what Grandma left me was never wood and keys. It was a life built without silence. When a family story like this ends, it rarely feels clean. It feels quiet. The way a room sounds after the music stops, when you can finally hear your own breathing again. And maybe that's the real point. Sometimes we don't lose what we thought we were losing. We lose the version of ourselves that stayed small just to keep everyone else comfortable. If there's anything this journey leaves with us, it's this: love doesn't have to mean silence. Boundaries don't have to be cruel. We can tell the truth with steady hands without turning it into a weapon, and still choose compassion even for people who never chose it for us. If this story touched something in you and you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to set a boundary with family, what was the hardest part? And if you'd like to stay with us for more stories like this, you can subscribe, not as a button to press, but as a way to join a corner of the internet where we listen, we breathe, and we heal together. Thanks for spending these minutes with us. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.